Thank you. Yesterday was a lot of fun. Had some great questions, some great conversation after the session and through the evening. Wasn't last night just a delight? Enjoyed sitting around the table, getting to talk to some of you and hearing about what's going on in your local ministry and that. And I just think it's one of the most amazing things about events like this, because we don't always get to do that. We're so focused on what's happening right in front of us in our own parishes and churches that we sometimes don't get to get to spend time with the people who are doing similar types of work, but in other churches. And many of you have asked for copies of the slides from yesterday. I'm going to make that available to Bruce, and that way you guys can use that. Some of the videos will be part of that as well, but definitely want to encourage you to continue this conversation that we're starting this weekend with the rest of your staff. If there is more, the rest of your lay leadership. It's a very, very important conversation. I'm curious, as we begin this session, what are some of the things that you're learning? What are some things that you're learning that you learned between yesterday or this morning in some of the sessions that you think could be game changers for you?
Use the word stewardship and revamp the whole process.
Wow. Lose it. Oh my gosh. Well, don't pay attention to some of my slides.
Yeah, could you repeat what people say?
Sure. She said to lose the word stewardship and revamp the process. Anyone else learning any game changing?
You have to be okay to talk about the money.
Very good. She said you have to be okay to talk about the money. That's very, very good. Very good. We have to be able to have that conversation in a spiritual context, for sure.
Talk about it in terms of the ministry you're doing and not the daggone oil and the lights.
That's right. That's exactly right. Very good. Connect the ask that you're making with the impact, and be sure that you're able to articulate that. Very, very good. Any others? All right. Well, today it's going to be a little bit different. Yesterday we talked a little bit about just kind of understanding the landscape of giving, and hopefully putting some flesh and bone on why you're making some observations about the fact that there might have been a time in your memory when you felt like people gave to church and they had a common understanding of what it meant to give to church, and now that doesn't seem to be something that's shared commonly across everyone in your pews. And you keep trying the same things, and you're wondering why the best you're getting is managed decline. So hopefully you were able to take some of that information and connect the dots, and that will hopefully give you some insights to some of the strategies that we talked about yesterday. And hopefully you can take one or two of them back with you, and hopefully that will help create some good conversation and some action items and make some change. Today I want to talk about just kind of the different side of it. We tend to think stewardship, again, is a financial issue that we're trying to meet the budget, or we need to build a building, or we need to fund a special mission effort. But what if stewardship is really about spiritual formation? Just go with me there. And I know we might not like the word, but let's just, what if we opened ourselves up to the idea that stewardship could really be a conspiracy from the very beginning. Now, I stole this title from a book that by a guy named Dallas Willard. He calls it The Divine Conspiracy, and he talks about the Beatitudes and really about bringing the kingdom of God on earth, and what does that mean. And I was really intrigued by that idea that he might suggest that. And so, the real big, in my mind, the conspiracy around stewardship is the idea that we think it's about money when it really is about heart. We talked about yesterday that what we do with our money is an outward, tangible reality of how we've been changed inside. So if we try to treat stewardship as a money problem, we're treating the symptom and not the cause. And so I tell leaders and challenge leaders with this, that if you have a money problem in your church, you have a spiritual problem that you need to deal with. And many of us Many of us are very comfortable in the spiritual realm, and somehow when we start talking about money, we feel like it takes us into a dimension that we weren't equipped or we didn't even sign up to do, right? We didn't read the fine print on our call to ministry where it said we're going to have to talk about money, and then we do, and so we look for ways to do that. But what are some things that you think about when you hear the word conspiracy?
Danger.
Secret.
Danger.
Danger. Cloak and dagger. That's right. Isn't that how we feel sometimes when it comes to stewardship? We feel like we're doing everything we can to pretty it up so that hopefully people will just get it and we can pass by it just as quick as possible, and then we can fund the budget and move on. And if it's just a little bit less than last year, that's okay. We can make it up somewhere, somehow. But conspiracy, the definition, according to Merriam-Webster at least, is to act or work together toward the same result or goal. And so, what if in fact stewardship was something that God designed, a construct for us to be in alignment with His intentions and His purposes? And I want to unpack that because I think that will help give us a framework for what this might look like in a spiritually formative environment. Sometimes when we think of conspiracy or we hear the word stewardship, we kind of have this look on our face. Like, did he really just say that? Do we really have to do that sermon series again? Gosh, can we find somebody to outsource that conversation to so that we don't have to, right? Can we? So if they get mad at them, at least they're gone, and I can just say I had nothing to do with it. I'm sure nobody in this room has ever thought that before. But really and truly, the conspiracy, as I understand it for stewardship, is a very, very positive thing. And I think we have, before we can begin to understand how our disciplines and habits around giving to church are today, we need to understand a little bit of a historical context. So this particular gentleman was former, I'm not sure where he is now, but at the time they put this out, he was the dean of Vanderbilt Divinity School. And he traced back church giving all the way back to the 1820s. So after the American Revolution, we decided that we didn't want to pay taxes anymore, right? And that was largely how the church was being funded, the official church at least, was being funded through taxes. So it was about 1820 when the last churches received any kind of subsidy from the government in order to operate, which meant that they had to become self-sustaining, right? Well, that puts the pastor in a pretty interesting predicament, if you will. All of a sudden, this hasn't been part of his or her training, this hasn't been part of the equation, and now in order for them to survive, they have to figure out how to make it work. And so, I contend that from the 1820s up till present day, we have worked really hard to recreate that subsidy. So then, but somewhere between the 1820s and the 1890s, we were in a largely agrarian culture, right? So we made our money in seasons. We had harvests. We sold animals at particular times. We made that money, brought to churches, and churches were relatively small. You didn't necessarily have a full-time pastor. You might have somebody who was on a circuit, and then you were able to operate the church without that and with the knowledge of that. And then, as we got toward the late 19th century, something happened in America: the industrialization. Right? It's the Industrial Revolution. And so as that happened, people went from getting paid seasonally to getting paid weekly. And so it was really about the late 19th century when our first understanding of weekly tithes and offerings came to be. So you see that? It was an interesting shift that the church made. As people got paid differently, we changed how we encourage them to give to churches. When they started getting paid from seasonally to weekly, we started talking about weekly tithes and offerings. And the church at this point is still very much a part of the vibrant life of the community, right? There was nothing to do on Sunday but walk down the street and go to the community church. And so you were part of it, which meant you were present. And as we talked about yesterday, still today our habits of church giving are largely based on you being present at a particular geographic location at a predefined time. And if you're there, you'll give, and if you're not, you don't. We talked about yesterday that there aren't many people in our churches that when they miss a Sunday, they chase us down throughout the week to give us a check and an offering envelope. I don't know, maybe those of you that are joining us today would say, well, that's all of my members are like that. But that simply isn't the case. And so we adapted. And then during that time, we went from silver to paper money to checks, and all that transformation took place. And then you had post-World War II, and you had the boom of America, right? We were growing, we were buying cars, and we were buying homes, and we were building infrastructure. And so that really birthed, a lot of what we know about the capital campaign movement that happened in churches. And we started building bigger churches, and there were more people, and it was all about that. And so we've now exhausted, if you can follow, he takes the book all the way up till about the 1990s. And so we're almost 200 years removed from a time when churches were funded through government subsidies. And the people who remember what it meant to give consistently and weekly are getting further and further removed from the process because we haven't taught it. And then something else happened. In the angst to recreate that subsidy, we've largely done it based upon the large middle, right? The middle tier. There's always going to be some people that are going to have inconsistent income. There's always going to be some people that are going to have exceptional wealth. But then there's a majority of our churches are filled with people in what we call that mid-level giver. They're going to give consistently over time, and over time they're going to get paid more consistently, and so that money is going to continue to increase. And we've operated our churches in large part based upon that. But what happens when that middle tier, you're not guaranteed the job and stability that you were before? What happens when you're not guaranteed to be paid more in the coming year than you were last year? Now, all of a sudden, our attempts to recreate that subsidy are decaying. There's greater uncertainty by a broad base of people that we have depended on to give consistently to our churches to fund it. And so we see, as I look in the data across many, many churches of all shapes and sizes across the country, you see a polarization. You see a swell of people that are coming to church and aren't getting anything. And you see a greater dependence upon people who have to give in exceptional ways. And that is simply unsustainable.